It is no secret that Diablo 4 desperately needed a lot of work, and that includes both the game and the classes themselves. And in Season 4, let me tell you, Necromancer has been completely changed. Your minions are going to be casting bone spears, your blood surges are going to be exploding corpses all around you doing damage. This class is completely different than it was before, and this is for the better. What we're going to be looking at today is the biggest change we've ever seen to Necromancer, and the best part is, with all of the gameplay changes that are coming, it is just going to be an absolute blast playing this season. I am so excited. So let's talk about what all is changing for Necromancer, starting with the generic class new uniques. So Tyrael's Might is a very powerful new unique that's coming for the chest piece with the strong effect where you're basically going to permanently have the artillery shrine, which is pretty wild. And on top of that, it's also going to be increasing our max resistances. And keep in mind, with the new itemization changes, that max all res, we're going to be getting that up to about 15% or so. So the amount of damage reduction we're going to have against elements is going to be ludicrous with this chest piece. I actually would not be surprised at all if this becomes meta. Now, the second unique is also very interesting. It's going to make it so whenever we cast a non-mobility, non-ultimate skill, we have a chance to cast a random skill. So this means that, whenever we cast Bone Spear, we have a chance to double cast it. We have a chance to, whenever we cast a basic skill, to cast Bone Spear. Like everything, right? These boots are actually really interesting. We might end up seeing them played. We'll have to see. But they're super interesting items. So those are the two generic uniques, but coming down here, we also have some balance changes with Tybalt's getting nerfed, Banished Lord's getting nerfed. These are both earned nerfs, in my opinion. These are going to make the game better. It's going to allow for more dynamic builds. We're also getting a buff to Disobedience, making it a lot more consistent. And this is interesting. So I don't know if Necromancer is necessarily going to play this, but look at this. You have 8% dodge chance. When you dodge, you get a bunch of Fortify. Okay, that's cool. Now look at this one. You have increased dodge chance, and whenever you dodge, you heal. That's very interesting, right? Like, a dodge build is now a legitimate form of survivability. I don't know that Necromancer will necessarily play it because we're not getting dodge from like Paragon or Skill Tree or anything like that. But if these effects are strong, we could definitely end up seeing it. So this is very interesting. A lot of these other changes are more minor, not that big of a deal for us, but this one is massive. So if you don't know, Needle Flare, whenever you get hit with Thorns, you have a chance to proc Thorns in an AoE instead of just on the enemy who hit you. Now, this never worked with Minions, so we never really played this, but now it will work with Minions. And keep in mind, Minions are now getting 100% of your Thorns. So whenever a Minion hits you, or whenever your Minions get hit, rather, they're now exploding for AoE Thorns damage, proccing 100% of your Thorns damage. Right? This change right here where they get 100% of your stats. Holy shit. That is such a big change. That is a huge deal. Thorns minions are on another level. And you're going to see when we get into all of the new changes that Necromancer has, besides what we've already talked about, you're going to see the Thorns build is even better. So, the Blood Mist slow has been removed. This is a nice quality of life. It just means that when we're in Blood Mist, we're no longer going to be slowed. So this is great. And then the Golem actives are now going to give us and the Golem unstoppable, which is awesome. And we can activate it while we're already crowd controlled. So now we have a second CC break besides just Blood Mist. If you're playing Golem, and you're going to see as we get into everything, playing Minions is much more viable. So Decompose has basically been completely reworked. Decompose is the basic skill where you channel it and you suck the life out of enemies. And so basically it's going to spawn corpses more often. It's going to generate more essence, and it causes explosions whenever you create a corpse or the target dies. I don't know how much damage is, like 40% weapon damage is pretty low. I don't know that this is actually going to be useful, but you get 10 essence whenever you generate a corpse as part of the skill now, instead of from the legendary, which is really strong. Then we're also getting guaranteed vulnerable application from the explosion, so it's going to be applying vulnerable in an AoE. So Decompose is now actually going to give us AoE vulnerable application, which is a big deal because obviously Necromancer's main source of vulnerable is Corpse Tendrils, which doesn't have great uptime. So there's actually a chance that we will end up playing Decompose in some of our builds just for the AoE vulnerable application. Army of the Dead is getting massively buffed. So if you don't know, Army of the Dead spawns a ton of corpses because of the volatile skeletons, which makes it extremely good in corpse explosion builds. It's already extremely good. With this buff, it's now going to be spawning 50% more corpses, which is incredible. This is going to give us a tremendous amount of damage on specifically corpse explosion builds, like a ton of damage. Those Black River builds really like using Army of the Dead for killing bosses, and now it's going to be even better. On top of that, it's also going to now count as a summoning skill, which is going to affect mostly just stat rolls on gear, as far as I know. I might be missing something. Maybe there's something else this works with that I haven't thought of yet. But as far as I know, this just works for the stat roll on gear. Now, Inspiring Leader has always been really strong, right? 12% attack speed. But it is now ludicrously better, giving us instead 12% crit chance, and they're removing the 2-second requirement while being healthy. This is the passive where, whenever you're healthy, you give attack speed to your minions. Now you're going to be giving your minions and yourself the crit chance. This is now going to be incredibly strong in bone builds. It's going to be incredibly strong in minion builds. It's going to be incredibly strong in every build, except for dot builds. But every build that's not a dot, definitely taking Inspiring Leader is incredibly strong. On top of that, we're getting a huge buff to Callan's Edict. This was the key passive. The old one you had to not take damage for 2 seconds, and then it would just give them 30% attack speed. Now you get 3% for each active minion, which is going to be like, it's going to be like 11, so it's going to be about 33%. So instead of 30, it's now about 33. And on top of that, it's always going to be up. So this ends up being a huge buff. So minions getting the stat scaling, right? Instead of 30% of your stats, you're getting 100% of your stats. Minions are incredibly powerful. I can guarantee you minions are going to be one of our strongest builds next season. They're definitely going to be A tier, potentially S tier. It depends a lot on the exact stats that could roll on gear and all of that kind of stuff. And you can see as we get into the Book of the Dead that minions are even more buff than you've already seen. But just the changes you've already seen, minions will already be an A tier or potentially S tier build. The Book of the Dead, I think, potentially makes them our best build. We're going to have to see, okay? I don't want to get too speculative, but minions, incredible. So, Skeletal Warriors will now run ahead of you and initiate combat. So this is a big change. Before, you would have to curse enemies to start combat with them. And besides that, your minions would just kind of meander around and they wouldn't fight until you either got hit or hit them. Now, your warriors in particular are going to be engaging enemies, which is really strong. Now, what you're going to see with these Book of the Dead changes is that they're trying to make minions playable in non-minion builds. So what does that look like? Well, here, Reapers, whenever they have their active, are now going to reduce, or, it's Book of the Dead option, to reduce your active cooldowns by 3 seconds. This is going to hit Corpse Tendrils. This is going to hit your ultimates. This is very powerful, right? This is hitting everything. This hits your golem. This is going to hit everything. So you could see how, maybe in a Bone Spirit build, you could play this to reduce all of your cooldowns, right? This could actually be strong in a non-minion build, potentially. We'll have to see. So, Defenders now taunt in an AoE, which is awesome, right? The AoE taunt means they're going to be holding threat. It means that you're not going to be getting hit. Your minion's going to be getting hit, which is exactly what you want. And instead of giving thorns, they take 99% reduced damage. I don't know if this is all the time or just during the taunt, but that seems really strong. That you might be able to actually keep them alive like pretty consistently, but this is the one of the changes I am most excited about. Like the thorns increases are great and everything, and we got the AoE taunts and stuff, but it's this kind of thing that is going to make minions very good, which is Shadow Mage's attacks now pierce. Now, one of the big problems with minions is they have to like find a target, attack the target dies, the minions freeze for half a second, they like look around, they find a new target, oh, attack it once, okay, target's dead, they meander around, they don't really do anything. But with the attacks piercing, this is now going to make it so that when your minions attack, they're obviously going to be cleaving and hitting a lot of enemies. This means that you're just going to clear a lot faster. Like that's literally all there is to it. You're just going to clear a lot faster. And you're going to see that there's going to be some more buffs to the minions and the itemization that's going to make this even better. But shadow minions are fully enforced now. And there's, like I said, there's an item that got changed where your skeleton warriors now do shadow damage as well. So this whole shadow build is extremely online. This will probably be roughly the de facto minion build, which will be shadow minions. So this looks really strong. Now, on top of that, remember we were talking about they're trying to make you play minions and not minion builds. Well, now you get 3% increased damage for each active shadow mage if you take this node. So, and obviously you can get 5, so this is a 15% damage multiplier. Not bad, right? This is not bad at all. Cold mages now always gain 3 essence whenever they attack instead of only against frozen enemies. So this is huge. So whenever your cold mages are, they're going to be pumping you with essence. Again, non-minion builds, right? This is like the key of it. They really want us to start playing minions in non-minion builds, and they honestly might have finally done it. Because look at this one as well. Their attacks now just apply vulnerable. They don't have to freeze enemies to apply vulnerable. They just apply it by attacking. Now, I believe this is only hitting the Book of the Dead upgrade, so you'll have to pick between these two. But you have the option between, like, this is typically going to be about 15 essence a second with your 5 minions, roughly. Or you can get the 100% uptime on vulnerable, which, again, is something that we value really highly on Necro because we don't have a lot of access to it. So this is very, very strong, right? So, but the Bone Mages are it, okay? Look at this. Bone Mages have a 25% chance to cast Bone Splinters. Again, essence generation, right? And potentially we can scale up this Bone Splinters to do damage. But also, more importantly, or Bone Spear if it's on your equipped skills. Now, what I'm very curious to see is if the double casting affix that you can now roll on gear, right? There's now an affix you can roll for Bone Spear that gives you a chance to double cast Bone Spear on attack. If these minions can proc that, holy smokes, man, you are going to be pumping out Bone Spears. This is going to be crazy. And keep in mind, too, something that's really interesting is that I assume this is 25% chance on attack, right? So, like Callan's Edict, like, what's the one called? Where Frenzy Dead, right? The legendary where you get your minion's attack speed. Minion attack speed becomes extremely valuable if this is procced on attack, which I assume it is. So minion attack speed is insanely valuable in Bone Sphere builds, and there's now this insanely fast speed farm build for Bone Sphere that plays Bone Mages, which is so cool, right? This is so cool. This is what we want in a Diablo game, man. I can't express how happy I am. The game is going to be so good next season. Like the class design is better. You got Uber bosses, you got greater rifts. Oh my god, I'm so excited. Okay, so this one is also interesting. So Bone Mages will now drop a corpse whenever they die. This is the secondary upgrade. And Bone Mages will attacks now grant the Fortify rather than granting the Fortify when they die. This is fairly nice. I don't think it's necessarily a massive deal, but there's definitely builds that can make use of this and to guarantee Fortify cap. So this is pretty decent. Now, the Blood Golem. Actually, all of the Golems, honestly. Like, they got a lot of numbers buffs in the last couple of seasons, but now they're getting a lot of functionality buffs that really, in my opinion, push the Golem to the point where you might even play it outside of minion builds. Like, the Golem is now an absolute beast. So look at this. This perk your Golem used to absorb 15% of incoming damage. So 15% of the damage you take would instead go to the Golem. Now it's 30%. So if you're playing with the Blood Golem with this effect, you now have a 30% barrier, like 30% damage reduction. Fucking crazy. On top of that, look at this. So this effect here was the one where your Golem does bonus damage whenever it's healthy. But now whenever you activate it, it's also going to heal you, which is interesting. I don't know that this necessarily has a ton of value, but it's definitely a decent effect, right? Like, we're not really going to complain about this. And it's a big heal, 5% of your maximum life per enemy. So if you drain 5 enemies, that's a quarter of your health. That's a big heal. Now, the Bone Golem is particularly interesting. So the first thing, the old effect was whenever your Golem would take a certain percentage of its damage, it would shed a corpse. Now this was bugged, and it was 20% of its base life is the theory that everybody has, or it's 20% before damage reduction. People don't really know which. But before it was every time your Golem got hit, it would basically spawn 20 corpses, which is the maximum amount of corpses that could be on the screen. But they're changing it, so it now spawns 5 corpses whenever it uses its ability. This is actually a nerf overall, but it makes it more reliable, right? It makes it function in an intended way instead of functioning in an unintended way, which was how it was before. So this is a good change, though it is a nerf, keep in mind. So this second effect is very interesting. So the second upgrade for the Bone Golem used to be, again, Life and Thorns, not that great. Now it unleashes Bone Spikes when taking damage. Now I assume that this is going to be like an AoE thing, like the Splinters, where you just do like an AoE where he'll just shoot in every single direction, shoot a projectile that will probably not pierce, maybe it will pierce, and will do damage to enemies. And this could be incredibly powerful, potentially. We'll have to see how good this actually is, but there's a lot of potential for this ability to make the Golem into an AoE farming beast. So, very interesting. Now, Iron Golem. Iron Golem is very iconic, especially when the game first came out. Everybody was playing Iron Golem. This meta has kind of shifted, but Iron Golem, massive buff. So the first upgrade used to be every 4 attacks you do a Shockwave that does basically no damage. Now it's every 2 attacks you do a shockwave that does 4 times as much damage. So it procs twice as often, does 4 times the damage. So this is an 8 times multiplier. This is an 800% buff to the shockwave. So should be decent now, hopefully. Now, the second upgrade, particularly interesting. They're trying to make it so that the Iron Golem can potentially compete with Corpse Tendrils, so that Corpse Tendrils isn't required in every build. And basically, your Iron Golem will not apply Vulnerable, which is a big downside, but it will pull in enemies. So potentially extremely strong. It depends on how tightly it stacks enemies. It depends on the range of the pull. Depends on a lot of factors. But overall, I mean, dude, Mage is casting Bone Spear. Golem spamming AoE here, right? With the Bone Spikes, just pumping AoE damage. 30% damage reduction from Blood Golem. The Essence Generation. The Shadow Mage's attacks now pierce. Like, holy smokes, man. This is what the Book of the Dead should look like. This is amazing. And I would not be surprised at all if non-minion builds started playing minions. Obviously, Bone Spear is going to do everything it can to run the Bone Mages. We'll see how well they end up fitting in. There's a bunch of issues that I'll talk about in a future video. But if, you're really going to want to run this, and if it works, holy shit, it's going to be so strong. The Essence Generation from Cold Mages, guaranteed vulnerable, like the Blood Golem, like these effects are crazy strong, even if you're not playing a minion build. But there is still a problem, which is, okay, but if you're not playing a minion build, how do you keep your minions alive? Well, we're going to scroll down real quick and let me show you, because we're talking about it. Look at this. So I think that this is the damage dealt on the Glyph, but I'm wondering if this is also going to buff the survivability of minions. We'll have to see if it actually does or not. It is potentially that this is also going to buff the survivability of minions. I'm not really sure. So if this is just damage, okay, we're going to have some trouble with minion survivability and hard content. But keep in mind, minions are also inherently inheriting 100% of your stats now, meaning all of your armor, all of your magic resistance. So minions are actually going to be quite a bit tankier now just by default, and potentially some tankiness buffs in the glyphs, but we'll have to see. Okay, so we've also got a bunch of changes to legendary aspects. There's so many changes in this patch, so I mean, it's awesome, right? Necromancer had a ton of problems with the build diversity, had a ton of problems with like the Book of the Dead, had a ton of problems with the skill tree, and so many of these things are now better. So this is interesting. Blood-soaked aspect now gives you 20% movement speed while on Blood Mist. So it used to be, while you're in Blood Mist, you no longer have a movement speed penalty. Now it's just going to give you straight up 20%, which is really strong. Second huge change. Unyielding Commander used to be flat attack speed. And if you don't know, the reason why this was bad is that minions can't scale above the attack speed cap. So basically, minions, if you go above 100% attack speed, gain nothing from increased attack speed. So instead, they're just getting flat damage. Good change. And this is also, keep in mind, 84% damage is way better than 84% attack speed as well. So this is a gigantic buff. So, Occult Dominion gives you 2 maximum skeletal mages. It is now also going to give you 2 max skeletal warriors. So this used to be 2 different aspects, and they're now combining it into 1, which is a big deal because it's going to free up an extra aspect slot for our minions. On top of that, this aspect, Blood Getters, which used to be the one that would give us increased warriors, is now going to also make your Skeletal Priest empower you. So you're going to get the healing, and you're going to get the, what is it? Is it 25% damage? I think it is now. It might be 30. It's like 25 or 30%, something like that. So, and keep in mind, this is a utility aspect, so you can put this on boots. And so you're going to be getting healed for a huge percentage of your life per second, and you're going to be getting the damage buff. This, unironically, so, okay, this has potential to be incredibly strong. The downside is that you have to be playing minions to use it. In order for this to be good, you have to have the minion, like the raised skeleton ability on your bar, and you have to actually have one of the minions active. So you either have to be playing mages or warriors in order to use this. So this is particularly good in the hybrid builds, right? So big potential here. One other thing I will mention, this might stack with itself. What does that mean? Well, minions inherit 100% of your stats, right? And Skeletal Priest gives a 30% buff, or whatever it is. It might be 25. And you're getting 70% of that, as well as your minions getting the full effect. So if that 70% that you get also applies to your minions, okay, pretty big buff, right? Big damage buff. Okay. So another interesting thing, flesh rending makes it so that whenever Decompose explodes rather than spawns a corpse, I think this still is not good, obviously. So, and then this one makes it so that Decompose chains to additional enemies and causes a bigger burst. I don't think this stuff's going to be good. Honestly, this stuff is never good. The only thing that could make this good is if it procs off of all of your basic skill modifiers. So like with the new gloves where, you mark enemies and then enemies you do basic skill damage to, they all take it. If this works with that, if it works with a bunch of other things, potentially could be strong. I'm not holding out on it. I just assume it's going to suck, but we'll have to see. So, Aspect of the Damned used to require you to have Decrepify and Iron Maiden. Now you only have to have either one. And keep in mind this also is going to work with the Metamorphosis curse. So you could actually run Metamorphosis and Aspect of the Damned and get the 50% shadow damage buff. Really strong. Untimely Death is being buffed so that it, instead of only affecting overpowers, it now affects crits. Now, this is actually probably going to be a nerf to overpower builds because overpower builds don't want to spend this proc unless it's an overpower, right? So you might end up wasting this proc on effects that you don't care about. But overall, like you can play this in Bone Spear now, you can play this in Sever now, you can play this in a lot of builds, and it's going to be pretty decent. Potent Blood now always gives the essence instead of requiring you to be healthy. Again, big buff. Now, okay. Everyone has always been annoyed at Ring of Vendelm builds, right, guys? All of you guys, every time I call a minion build, but it runs Ring of Vendelm, a bunch of people in the comments, oh, it's not a minion build, it's got Vendelm, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sure, fair enough. So what's interesting is about the Ring of Vendelm now is your minions are going to be getting 100% of your stats, right? So 100% of your stats means that they are going to, all of the damage that scales the Vendelm is also going to be scaling your minion damage. So before, you didn't want to run crit in a normal minion build. You didn't want to run crit damage. You didn't want to run anything that didn't affect your minions. But now your minions are affected by all of this stuff. So all of these things that hit the Vendelm are also hitting your minions now, which makes Vendelm much easier to play in a pure minion build. And I think that this is actually a nerf, but it means that you don't have to have a way to proc it. So the way we were procking it before was we were playing Bone Spear, using Bone Spear to proc Lucky Hit in order to make the Vendelm go off. Now, every 6 attacks from minions is just going to be empowered. This is going to make the Vendelm builds more consistent, but it will make their damage lower. Overall, it's hard to say if this is a net buff or a net nerf. I think this is probably a net nerf, but with the changes where minions now scale 100% of your stats, that's a massive buff to Vendelm builds because now you can just play Vendelm in generic minion builds. So the Vendelm situation is a bit weird. We're going to have to see how this plays out. We'll see how good it actually is, but it sounds like it could be decent. Now, this change is very significant. The control glyph now just gives you 20% damage against any crowd-controlled enemy. Slowed, stunned, whatever it is. This just works now. It no longer requires them to be stunned or frozen. This is a pretty significant buff. It's pretty much just going to be like a 10% damage buff against everything that's not a boss. So, pretty big deal. The cult leader glyph, massively buffed. So, they now cap the attack speed at 100%, fair enough. And minions get 30% damage per 20% attack speed from 15. Remember, this started at 10. Now it's at 30. So, this is another gigantic buff for minions. Honestly, if minions aren't good this season, they're never going to be good, okay? These buffs are absolutely crazy. There are so many interesting builds coming up. We got minions with bone spears. I didn't even mention this, by the way. Somewhere in the patch notes, bone spear now counts as a core skill, which enables a bunch of different builds. Pure minions, Vendelm minions, Thorn minions, like every build. So many cool things, guys. So many cool things. I'm so excited for the season. I hope you guys are excited too. So let me know down below what you guys think. And yeah, I'm going to do a lot of PTR content. We're going to be talking about builds to play in the PTR. I'm going to be talking about the builds I test in the PTR. So stay tuned for that. But I am pumped for the future of the game. D4 is back, and we're finally coming out of beta. So let's go, guys. See you around. Thanks for watching. Peace.